We are live, Bipin. Please take over.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for invitation in this webinar today. Distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Om Katel, distinguished panel member from Bangladesh, Ms. Saida Rizwan Hassan. From Pakistan, we have Ms. Alifa Salam, Afia Salam, and from Nepal, Dr. Vishnu Rajupredi, respected moderator, Ms. Shruti Sinha, and the head of the regional office of Frederick Newman Foundation, Dr. Karsten Klein, and fellow participants. My name is Bipin Gimire, working as a regional political analyst at the Frederick Newman Foundation, New Delhi. It is my honor to welcome you all to today's webinar on climate change in South Asia, the impact on livelihood and mitigation strategies. This particular webinar comes under the banner of South Asian Perspective. Frederick Newman Foundation has been organizing different webinars relevant to South Asia, such as the role of women in South Asian societies, the participation of youths and in politics, and the impacts of the global crisis in South Asia. We have garnered more than 30,000 reaches in our social media. In today's webinar specifically, we focus on the issue of climate change and the impact on the region. As we all know, climate change is an issue of global concern, and South Asia is among the region that is most vulnerable to the impact of the climate change. The region is home to 2 billion people, and it is estimated that the impact of the climate change could lead to the severe disruption in the livelihood of the millions of people in this part of the world. In this webinar, we will explore the effects of the climate change on the livelihood in South Asia and discuss possible mitigation strategies. Our esteemed panel of experts will share the insights and experiences and highlight the challenges and opportunities that we have regarding these pressing issues. I hope that this webinar will serve as a platform for sharing knowledge and experiences and facilitate the dialogue between different stakeholders, finding the practical and sustainable solution to the challenges posed by the climate change in South Asia. Once again, welcome to this important and timely discussion.
Audible that side? I'm not sure. Me, I can't hear.
Right, I think we have Mr. Dr. Om Katel here.
Am I audible?
Sent you a link in WhatsApp. So that link takes you to the webinar, but you need to download the WebEx. So I don't know if...
Okay, so...
if Dr. Om Katel, if you are audible and if you cannot open the video, that's also okay with us.
That's why... That's already open. Then again. Next.
We can hear you, Mr. Katel.
This one open. Show us the next.
Dr. Katel, are you here?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we can hear you. Dr. Katel, we can see you. Can you hear us?
Okay. Hello, good evening, everybody. If I'm audible, I can't hear you all, but if I'm audible, just give me a thumbs up. I can start. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and please apologize for the little technical glitch in the system.
Yeah, okay. So once more, thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to thank the organizer for giving this opportunity. And it's a privilege, and I'm humbled. Once more, thank you. And I'm from the Agricultural College here under the Royal University of Bhutan. So my talk would a little bit be biased in the sense that I would focus more on the agriculture than any other discipline. So the title that it was given to me was the impact of livelihood, impact of climate change and livelihood and mitigation strategies. So climate change, I think it's unequivocal and no longer a future phenomenon. It is here, right here, and we are bearing the brunt of climate change. And it has been stated over and over again and predicted since decades. And it is without ambiguity, it is an human-induced phenomenon. And it is also recognized as an issue of injustice associated with development failures and lack of sufficient mitigation and adaptation. And just look at this, surprisingly, South Asia is among the most vulnerable regions to the implications of climate change. And there are very recent publications, I think, they just came out a couple of weeks ago, and these publications also states that the South Asia would actually suffer a significant impact in the next decade. It is not very too far away from what they have said. And it is true that if we look at climate, the temperature, precipitation patterns, temperature, in the last 100 years from 1800 to 1900, and then from 1900 to 2000, if you just look at least in 1900 to 2000, there is average increase of 0.8 degrees Celsius. And then, but if you just look at more recent, from 1960s onwards, and then even more recent, like since 1990s, we can see that the average increasing temperature is about 2 degrees. And this is interesting in South Asian countries, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, and it just shows almost the same temperature average increase in this region. And if we just look at the number of heat waves that has affected in this region, Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, I think what has happened in the Pakistan in the recently, we all know that what has happened in India, it doesn't need any description. But then what really takes me is that if you just look at highest recorded temperatures in this region, the average is about 46 to 47 degrees. And that is something that we need to really worry about what's going to happen in the future. And from there, similarly, look at the natural hazards and then the disaster that has happened. And there was analysis in the decadal analysis looking at the natural hazards and disaster from 1985 until now. And we look at in the last decade, since 2005, there has an increase in the events, frequencies of these different events. And if you just look at this region, relate South Asia, the situation, environment, and then this change in climate and then precipitation, South Asia accounts for 2/5 of the world's poor, and almost half of the children are malnourished in this region. Now, until now, if half of the children are malnourished, and if the temperature precipitation pattern shows, so much of uncertainty, what would happen in the future is a big question that really we need to think about. And in that, if you just look at 70% of the South Asian population depends on agriculture for their livelihoods. And agriculture, in a way, is most affected in the sector due to climate change. And if you just look at the weather and climate, weather affects crop growth, crop yields, and climate affects irrigation, soil quality, ecosystem services that comes out, and then that is helpful for cultivating crops. And on the other hand, again, now looking at this, so much of people who are affected, and there is another argument on who would be affected most. I think all of us know that the climate change has greater impact on the people who doesn't have much resources. And to address the socioeconomic challenges, access to reliable, affordable energy, and then energy supplies, and then other resources is required. Now, how do we provide this access to affordable energy to those people so that they will improve in their living conditions, they will improve their livelihood, is another question that we need to look at. Now, people say that there are these different terms they have coined. One is called climate refugees, and more recently they had started saying that climate-induced migration, whatever we call it. But then, if you just look at migration data across the regions in South Asia, it is significant, and it tells a lot of different stories from different regions. And in our regions as well, it is we need to look at this data. What is the factor? What has happened? Are we failing in policies? What is the policies required to retain these people? Because agricultural input, if we need to prosper in terms of agriculture, we need these resources, for employment, to employ them, and then so that we will have labor resources, so we will prosper in terms of agriculture. And in terms of this issue is there, but then if you just look at what is different governments in our vision, what they have done, if you just look at documents like nationally determined contributions, National Adaptation Program of Action, and National Adaptation Plan, these are very beautiful documents. And in the last decade or so, if you just look at, there has been so much of improvement in terms of developing these documents and then committing the global communities that what our government or their government, in our regional government would do. But then at the local level, if you just look at local level, the issues related to climate change, when temperature, there is so much of fluctuation in terms of temperature, specifically warming, soil management, for example, soil erosion, soil quality that will be dwindled. And on the other hand, in order to increase the productivity, what farmers have been doing is they have been using the chemical fertilizers. These the fertilizers which farmers are using is affecting the soil quality in a way. And soil is our life, soil is our blood, soil is our flesh that we need to survive in the future. And then soil is very important because it doesn't come, the food doesn't come from urban areas, it comes from the rural areas. And in the rural areas, do we have policies to secure this soil in the rural areas? Do we have policies to encourage the farmers to go for organic farming? And in terms of, similarly, if you just look at sustainable land management, sustainable agriculture, they say that there are other options like using nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based approach. We can prosper, we can make make our agriculture, conventional agriculture, a little bit modernize it and it's sustainable. And in that sense, do we have policies? Of course, if you just look at in many of our region, our countries, we have very good policies on that, but implementation, is it happening at the local level? And similarly, if you just look at agricultural point of view, crop diversification, my father is 82 years old, and then every winter I go home and I talk to him, and he shares this idea of crop diversification. How is it useful, and when can we use it, and how this is useful for crop productivity? I learned more from him than from the science that we have been trained for the last 14, 15, 16 years or so. Similarly, as the academician, myself, we go around, I talk about crop insurance, but do these farmers have a secure crop insurance in terms of disasters and, in terms of the calamities? Do they receive these insurances? And all the activities, that is crop insurances, social networking, the community-based adaptation, for example, the community forest management in Nepal is one of the pioneer approaches in the world. And, this has been, they are doing, and it is functioning from based on the local approach. And if you just look at this, there are some very good stories, but upscaling, there is no platform, or maybe there is no resources to upscale and then, develop it. So these are some of the challenges. And in terms of the low carbon development, if you just look at in document, it is beautifully put. But most of the time what happens is climate change is taken as a political issue rather than an issue of livelihood or survival or a developmental issue. And I'd like to quote one of the experts said in a conference that, and I liked it very much, and I quote, "It is very easy to be part of global meetings without having a track record at home. There is a dichotomy that we want to be global leaders when it comes to the environment, but what is our track record when it comes to environmental management? The focus should be really on holding governments accountable to the commitments they have made to the laws they have enacted," I unquote. So, and this takes me to the concept of human rights, risks and challenges to the human rights. And then here the experts say that the term climate justice, which acknowledges that climate change can have social, economic, public health, and other adverse impacts on unprivileged populations. Now, what climate justice means is it's a right for survival with development and climate action. Urbanization, for example, we take it, and then everybody has the right to have access to water, access to medicine, access to health services, whatever they have. And second one, climate justice also means that people-centered approach is required for climate action, such as representation, without excluding anybody. So it has to be an inclusive approach, different gender, different social groups that has to be included in the development. Third one is recognizing that climate justice means recognizing that not everyone has contributed in the same way. So the policies has to have that, polluters pays principle, for example. Those who are polluting more, they have to bear the cost of whatever is going around. The last one is climate justice also means that ensuring social justice, which means our future generations. Are we doing justice if we leave the planet in mess? So if we take the responsibility as human being and rational thinkers and a being that has some kind of a power to think, then can we not do something? So these are the questions that climate justice experts say that climate justice reflects. And if we just talk about environment, take this environment. We have been talking about this environment, since 1970s, and also on climate change. If not 1970s, we have been talking about climate change since 1990s. And I share with you that if one discipline can share the issue of climate change, probably it would have been solved a long time ago. But climate change is such an issue that it's a global issue, and the impact is local, and it has multifaceted, it has multidiscipline, it has different perspective. So it requires, collaboration and bringing all people on board, and then listening to them, and then solving this issue from a different perspective. And then there are treaties. We just look at these treaties, for example, Basel Convention on the Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste, Kyoto Protocol, for example, with regard to greenhouse gases emissions, and No Harm Principle, which states sovereign rights of national resources and state obligations of no damage to the foreign investments, foreign environment. Now, in this, if you just relate to the state's responsibility, the state has the responsibility to provide right to survival, and then look at transboundary environmental damages, they will have to pay for the transboundary damages, that whatever emissions they have incurred. And then effective implementation of policies and laws, that is, having laws, rules, and regulations is not enough. They'll have to be active, put into place, and then they'll have to work. And of course, if you just look at the climate change related mitigation and adaptation strategies in our region, there are so many challenges, and we need to also acknowledge that this challenges is a sort of a geographical, where India, Himalayas, and then Indian Ocean dominate the weather and climate hazards that affect the region because of the complex topography, affect reliability, availability of observations, and there are so many shortcomings that we need to develop. And another thing is that when people are poor, and when we talk about 30 years down the line, I think sometimes the approach do not really work. The farmers respond to short-term risks, and we need to think about what can we do with that, and encourage farmers to adopt the long-term, because we need to understand the behavior of farmers, and for example, using providing different platform, different strategies can actually help farmers to change their gender roles. For example, feminization of agriculture. How can we change that? And there are different other social norms, and raising level of education awareness. These things actually may shift their focus on climate change adaptation. So, and there are so many issues. I can keep on going. Now, the last thing I'd like to tell you is that, and this is my favorite. Countries have boundaries, and these boundaries are created by the humans, and ecosystems do not have boundaries. And when we do not respect the ecosystem boundaries, ecosystem do not function properly. And one of the reasons that why we are failing is that we do not know the ecosystem boundary. Rather, we respect the political boundaries. And if we change this concept of breaking the political boundaries and coming together on ecosystem boundaries, I'm sure we would prosper. So sorry I'm taking more time. I'll stop there. Thank you. And back to the organizer. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katel. It was really interesting avenues that he brought into the discussion. He was the faculty member of College of Natural Science, Royal University of Bhutan, with 21 years of experiences. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Shruti Sinha. She is lead policy and outreach officer at Chintan with a double master degree in international affairs and world history from Columbia University and the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. Shruti has also represented India at the G20 summit in Shanghai. She has been a LUMP fellow previously and has worked on the key legislation like Motor Vehicle Amendment Acts and pioneered hard advocacy research on the various issues like child safety and road, gender-based violence against women in politics, and women's role in the plastic water recycling. At Chintan, she works on issues like inclusive air pollution policies, building climate resilience among the urban poor women's circular economy for plastic, and just transition for vulnerable communities like waste pickers. So I'll give my floor to Ms. Shruti Sinha to lead the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bipin, and thanks to Dr. Katel also for really setting the stage. We're here at a very important time and we're discussing a very pertinent issue, which is climate change. And as we do that, we may not realize it, but we make history because we do it through building solidarity and dialogue amongst one of the most important and strategic geopolitical locations in the world, which is South Asia. South Asia isn't of today. We actually go back a long time. We go back to pre-modernity. We have seen the exchange on sharing of ideas. We've seen the exchange of cultures, people, land, and resources. And the geographical landscapes and climatic conditions within the region itself vary very greatly. So basically, marine pollution is as much a challenge for us as would be, say, rapid melting of glaciers. So in India, for instance, there is an increased recognition by the leadership that we need to shift to a lifestyle for environment. But the big question is, what does that mean? Who are the frontline victims, and how would climate adaptation even look for them? Also, are big polluters held accountable for the harms, and are the poorest communities at the center of community-led climate resilience building? So while some of the answers are through government policy or national adaptation plans, the others come through innovations by citizens and civil society themselves. This can be in many forms. For instance, in our organization at Chintan, we are working with 1,000 women living in low-income informal settlements in the capital city of Delhi, where we operate, for community-led interventions on two key issues which affect the city, which is heat waves and air pollution. Similarly, we also do work around nutritional resilience, which is something that is directly at risk due to climate-induced food insecurity. But the threats are not just about Delhi or India, they're for all of South Asia, and today is the day to talk about that. So for the panel, we have veterans from the field, and I'm honored to be moderating such a prestigious, transnational panel. And so I just now call upon each of the speakers and introduce them. Dr. Bishnuraj Upreti is an executive chairperson of the Policy Research Institute, Nepal. He has worked as a research fellow at King's College, the University of London, and the Centre for Environment Strategies, University of Surrey in the United Kingdom. He has more than 3 decades of experience in development sector. He served as South Asia coordinator of a global research program called NCCR North-South, and senior researcher focusing on state building, peace and unconventional security, governance, as well as North-South research partnership. We welcome you, sir. We also have Saida Rizwana Hassan, who is a Bangladeshi attorney and environmentalist. She is the chief executive of the Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association, BELA. She was awarded the Goldman Environment Prize in 2000. She was also awarded the Ramon Magsaysay Award in 2012 for her uncompromising courage and impassioned leadership in a campaign of judicial activism in Bangladesh that affirms the body for marine protected areas and Prime Minister's advisory body, the National Climate Change Council. As a development practitioner, she is associated in a voluntary capacity with Indus Earth Trust and Bahan Beli as the elected president of the Executive Committee and Board of Trustees. We welcome you, ma'am. So with this, I now will begin the panel discussion. I just wanted to speak to the audience once that if you do have any questions, we will be taking it in the end. So please feel free to introduce yourself and drop your questions onto the chat box. So starting with the common question for all our panelists, what are the sources of climate change in your countries, which is Nepal, Bangladesh, and Pakistan? And what have the impacts been? Who is the most affected by it? If you could tell us who the frontline victims are, for instance. We can start with Dr. Upreti and moving on to Ms. Hassan and then to Ms. Salam. So, Dr. Upreti.
Thank you, Susie. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizer. Thanks for providing this space. This is a subject of my keen interest, so I will share my perspective on that. regarding what are the source of climate change, because obviously South Asia in general and Nepal in particular are not the major source of the climate change, but still we have identified formally few of them as the use of fossil fuel is the one most common, because we are entirely dependent on them. Then generating power also requiring some of the emissions related fuels. Manufacturing industries are also a little bit contributing on that. Cutting down of the forest fire and others are also contributing to the climate change because of the emission. And the transportation and vehicle as everywhere in the South Asia and across the world, these are quite common. And agriculture and farming, you see, we have also some stuff to burn, etc. And it requires huge number of the fossil fuel to operate. Heating in the building, though we have not that big heated system, but still we will be producing some carbon during that process as well. And also in the latest phenomena is the consumeristic behavior of the people also producing a lot of emission. But generally most of the emission producing sector is agriculture in Nepal, as well as I realize in other country as well. So what sort of impact we have from that is also generally common to all this extreme weather changes we are observing. Similarly, the water sources, spring sources are also diminishing, and there are glacier melt is very common, as are most of the Himalayas. We can see a very black rock in particularly in the summer. It was quite terrifying to observe that. The heavy floods are also very common. Landslide and soil erosion, because of our topography and this mountain terrain, we are quite suffering. And also sometimes prolonged drought and record-breaking warm weather we are also experiencing in the later years. So wildfires are also common and causing, they are also causing the emission. Rainfall pattern are quite changing. We observe, and several reports have shown that is quite distinct in the past and this decades. Heat waves. So this all consequently, it has a great impact on the biodiversity, in the environment, ecosystem services, water resources, as well as the human health, because they are directly affecting to the safe drinking water, food insecurity is also increasingly experiences. So these all have the direct impact, but who is affected the most is the quite concern. And of course, perhaps this is common to South Asia. All mostly affected are those who are marginalized, poor, vulnerable, disabled communities, even farmers. These are the ones who are affected. In general, all are affected, but if we have to categorize, these are the most commonly affected people from this concern and climate issues. I stop here for the time being.
Thank you so much, Dr. Priti. I now move on to Ms. Hassan.
With the same question.
Yes. If you could focus more on what are the impacts you've seen in Bangladesh and who are the frontline victims?
Well, it's being said that if climate change happens the way it is being feared, then 1/3 of Bangladesh will go underwater. And Bangladesh is already a very densely populated country. It is the 8th most densely populated country of the world. So if 1/3 of Bangladesh goes underwater, that means that my children, when they grow old, and definitely their children, will be drawing the map of Bangladesh very differently. So it is an issue of political sovereignty for us. When 1/3 of the country goes underwater, that means the coastal Bangladesh will disappear. So in addition to changes on people's life, it will bring in many changes in the ecosystem also. We will have to accommodate the people of these 19 coastal districts in the remaining two-thirds landmass, which is already very populated. This landmass will not be adequate for producing food for this entire population. If the sea rises and it intrudes into the rivers, the second largest sweetwater fishery of the world, which is Bangladesh, will become salinated. The farmers will not have enough water for irrigation because your river waters will become salted water. That will have an impact on food production. So it is the fishermen, the coastal people, the farmers who will be the most impacted. And now in Bangladesh, if you go to the coastal area, you will see that people have already started suffering because of shortage of potable water. There are areas in the coastal part where girls take birth control pills throughout the year because they can't afford to have a period. They really don't have access to water. The pregnant women get eclampsia, which is like high blood pressure during pregnancy, and all of it because they have to take saline water constantly. So we can see in-country migration from the coastal areas to the mainland. There's another thing that I often worry about is how this new generation is growing up. It's a generation that has a lot of mental stress to deal with. Like last year alone, we had around 2 cyclones, 2 very major scale floods. And we have to brief our children about how their future would look like. And once you brief them about how it would look like, I think I'm actually scaring my next generations. It's a very stressed, depressed, tensed new generation that is growing up. So it is the youngsters who are having dengue even in winter because the mosquitoes have adapted, who are seeing monsoon without rain, who are not seeing proper winter, because we are struggling to produce more and more food because we have started to lose our landmass. The production system is also stressed because we are using more and more chemicals so that the system produces more. So you can say that the traditional livelihood earners, the young people, the coastal women are at the forefront.
Thank you, ma'am. That was very, very insightful. Moving on to Ms. Salam, again, if you could focus on who the frontline victims would be and what are the impacts that, of course, we know about the floods and we will talk about it, but what are the biggest changes and shifts that you've seen and who are most affected? I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me? So thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you, FNF, for giving us this opportunity. And I think this is such an important conversation to be had, especially within South Asia, because in the global conversation on climate change, now the global South has been established as a region or as a group of countries, not necessarily just in South Asia, which are more impacted by whatever has been done by global North. So that sort of that divide has already been established. But within global South Asian countries are more impacted because one thing it's a very, very densely populated region, as has been mentioned. I mean, 2 billion people is very difficult to get your head around that population size and how many people are impacted. And most of these countries are actually populated, the majority of the population of these countries is not very well off financially to be able to build that kind of a resilience or adaptive resilience where the vulnerability hits them and they can bounce back. So the climate change impacts, of course, are being felt now. This is not something in the future. This is the here and now that we are dealing with. I mean, my country faced the floods into 2022. Part of India did. Some other Southeast Asian countries did. And we realized that the things that we said would be happening due to climate change have already started to happen. And no, the impacts are not equally felt because we have these different segments of population, as very eloquently pointed out by our keynote speaker. And we have to keep on, wearing these different lenses to see the different kind of vulnerabilities. So everybody is impacted by climate change when a region is hit, but women are disproportionately affected because of the special social status that we see in South Asia according to the women. And of course, there are children, there are the elderly, there are those physically challenged or any other, challenges that they face. And we do not have that adaptive capacity yet because maybe we were not ready. We were still thinking of these things happening later, although the science was there. For the past, I think, a decade and a half, the way these countries have been straddling the Global Vulnerability Index, the top 10 bracket, I think that those signs were not maybe taken as seriously as they should have been taken. And this is why we see the impacts which are so intense and so severe that it becomes very difficult. The society does not have the elasticity within it to be able to cope with these threats. Now, interestingly, Pakistan, yes, it is. There are other countries which are ahead of Pakistan in the Global Vulnerability Index, but we must also see the geographical location and the ecological landscape of Pakistan. It's a multi-threat country like India. India is a very big country. So, all the regions do not face the similar kind of threat from climate change. So similarly, Pakistan. Now, our friend Rizwana from Bangladesh has said most of the threats that Bangladeshis are perceiving are because of the sea level rise. But in Pakistan and India, the coastal areas are, facing that threat. We have the northern glacial areas, which are facing the threat of glacial lake outburst floods. And that itself, increases the volume of water within the rivers that flow down the plains. And that brings in yet another threat. And this time, if I only focus on the disaster that we are still battling with, it hasn't gone away. The climatic changes basically were the colliding of two monsoon systems over an area which never had monsoon. So that is a definite indication of climate change doing this, because that is what climate change is all about. It's shifting rainfall patterns. It's shifting the heat index. So the temperature is rising. That last year also we did not have a spring. And this year, now we are in February, and we are experiencing temperatures that we usually used to experience in the end of April and beginning of May. Now, this may seem very frivolous to talk about this. Okay, we've got a short winter, but, as Mr. Katel said, if you look at it from an agrarian country's perspective, this is a huge disaster in itself, because it impacts your agricultural productivity, the yield quality, and then you run into food insecurity, and of course the pushing down into poverty of a larger swathe of people who were just making ends meet. So they were on the borderline, but now they've been pushed into poverty. And then the rain disaster comes, and they lose their assets and their homes and their livelihoods and their livestock, and that pushes them further down. So there are so many challenges that countries in Southeast Asia or South Asia basically are battling with, and they are very similar because obviously, these are the climate and environment knows no boundaries. And this impacts the biodiversity, the habitat loss. So it's such a trickle-down effect, or rather, I would say the domino effect, because everything then falls, and it gets disturbed. And this is where I feel this conversation is so important, because these are collaborative solutions that we have to come up with. This is the sooner all tiers of population understand this and all tiers of governance understand this, that we have to come up with collaborative solutions. I really don't see a way out of that. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for your inputs. I would move on to the next set of questions, which is individualized for each of the speakers. I'll start with Dr. Upreti, and I would request all of you for this particular question, that if you could keep your response to maybe 3 minutes each. So, Dr. Upreti, as someone working in the policy space, what do you see as the most necessary policy interventions to reduce the impacts of climate change?
Thank you. The most important for me working in the policy sector is, of course, the responsive policy by each country that addresses the priority to investing in the low emission and the no emission alternative renewable energy sources. That will cut the route, but it is not that easy, and it has to come with several other quite interrelated issues like the governance reform, because we know, all of us are quite familiar about the governing system in South Asia. So the governance reform, including the institutional reform, and also focusing to the research and generating the evidences, looking for alternative, and also quite engagement and dialogue among the key stakeholders in addressing this issue, and ensuring that these dialogues and engagement among the stakeholders are happening in a more proactive way, more responsive way, and their feedback system are incorporated into the policy system. That is one quite important element. The other element is also developing the negotiation capacity of the countries to negotiate with the real polluters. We South Asian are not the real polluter. You see, there are others who are polluter, and when it comes about the climate financing, always there is a trick, this and that, and all the arguments. What we need is a very strong political backup as a common voice of the South Asia, and the very skillful negotiator to deal with this resistant group. So that is equally important, I realize. And also mainstreaming our work, focusing to the climate risk, climate insecurity as a major forthcoming challenges in the region. It is not an issue of a single country or single community or single individuals. It is a collective challenges, collective security threat of the region, far, far beyond the conventional security. So in that respect, the policy, the regulatory provisions, the institutional arrangement, the capacity building of the research institution, the performance, all we have to redefine, rework. Only then we will be able to really address that challenges. And it's not a question of particular country or particular leader or particular group. It's not a question of tension with Pakistan or India or tension with other countries. It's a collective survival threat for us, and we have to work collectively, and that must be ensured by the respective policy. And beyond that, we have to have the common South Asian climate policy, which has to give the bigger, broader framework to work by the country. So that is how I see the engagement at the state level, at the citizens level, at the civil society level, at the academic, activist, all level. We have to engage quite meaningfully, proactively. Thank you. I hope I have not spent much time.
No. I think I absolutely buy your point on the whole negotiation capacity building. I think that's excellent and something that we should think about. So thank you so much. I know that Ms. Hassan has to leave earlier. So what I'll do is that I will ask you 2 questions together, and then you can just answer collectively if that's all right. So my specific question to you was that if you could tell us more about Bela and the kind of legal action you have taken on the issue of climate change, and also if you could focus some attention on if you think South Asian solidarity, for instance, is a solution, then I mean, how do you think that this can be? How do you think we can lead it? How do you think we can sort of implement this South Asian solidarity? So if you could focus on that, it'd be great.
Thank you. BELA stands for Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association. So we are an environmental justice advocate group. We give legal assistance to people on environmental issues. There was a time when we started back in 1993 that we will go through newspaper and search for issues and then file a public interest litigation. That is no longer the case. We don't even get time to read newspapers. So many, communities come to us for legal assistance, and the issues are very diverse. Because in Bangladesh, any environmental problem you can think of is there except volcanic eruption. So people come to us with different set of problems and we give them legal assistance. We also work with the government at times so that new rules are enacted or colonial rules are updated. We also do advocacy on certain issues. For example, at the moment we are trying to launch a campaign on single-use plastic. We want the government to come up with enforcement. The regulations we already have in hand, but we want the government to enforce what they have. So we want to really go for a campaign on this. So we do litigation, advocacy, and campaign. I won't say that our cases are climate change cases as we understand it, but we have campaigns so that the government of Bangladesh moves away from the fossil fuel path. The government of Bangladesh moves away from the import-reliant energy model that they have chosen. And we want the government to go for 100% renewable. And as member of MVC, most vulnerable countries, in terms of climate change, it was our Prime Minister who was the chair of this forum, and she committed there that by 2050 will be all 100% renewable. And the pathway might sound problematic, but it is feasible. One just has to do the exercise. We are trying to help the government, create a momentum among the civil society players, where there is more pressure, more force for the government to think of it as an agenda. They committed it in the international platform, and when they come to Bangladesh, they keep on, approving the same projects that go for nuclear or burning of coal. The cases that we do for protecting our forest, the cases that we file challenging fossil fuel plants can be actually marked as climate change cases also. The fight that we have against industrial agriculture, sometimes going to the court challenging the overuse of pesticides or use of a given pesticide, can also be branded as climate change litigation. But in litigation, you have to be reactive. There is hardly scope for you to go to the court and ask for the development narrative to be changed with a proactive approach, because the courts would only give you relief when you suffer or there is a threat to some of your rights. On whether there can be South Asian solidarity on climate change issues, the answer is yes and no both. Of course, we have common challenges. Of course, we will have common problems. And since we share common natural resources, there is scope that if we use our collective wisdom, we'll be able to address some of the climatic threats. Say, for example, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, we share common rivers. Same with India and Pakistan, they share common rivers. We also have China as a player there. But the major challenge is in the South Asian region, we say South Asia, But who is actually a South Asian? We all are more comfortable in calling us Bangladeshi or Indian or Pakistani, which is not the case in EU. The political integration that has taken place in EU is something that is missing here. And we in the SARC, you see, that is a regional platform where we could share ideas. They have climate change as an agenda, but they don't really meet. They don't talk about how to come together to solve the problems. Of course, we took common stand, or many of us took common stand against fossil fuel. We were for phasing out, but India came forward and said no, phasing down from coal. So there are development narratives on which they don't want to compromise, and rising above narrow national interest and seeing it through a regional perspective is not something that is happening in South Asia, but we simply don't have the political integration. But again, on another instance where we worked together is to get legal recognition, formal, official recognition of this notion called loss and damage. There, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we all fought together in this COP. So there are instances where we can take common position, we can negotiate, but economically, technologically, scientifically, we are not on the same footing. So our negotiation blocks, negotiation priorities, negotiation strategies differ. But we can, of course, all press for environmental justice. We can press for climate justice. India is a very, fast emitter of carbon. But there we all have taken common position that we want historical responsibility to be the basis of climate justice and not emission that is being done to eradicate poverty. So yes, there are issues where we are taking common positions, but we could do better because India will be a water-stressed country by 2025, 2030. Bangladesh will also be facing the same. So if we could come together, have regional collaboration to manage the shared water resources together, putting aside our narrow national interests, that I think could be a win-win situation for all of us. But I don't think our politics, the way it's running now, will allow us to do that anytime soon. I'm done.
Again, thank you so much, and thank you so much for being a part of this panel and for all your very insightful comments that I'm sure all of us will take back and hopefully act on. So thank you for that. With that, I move on to Ms. Salah. I think, so I have a question for you, which is basically that, so how have the devastating floods in Pakistan changed the conversation around climate change in the country itself? And I would also like you to weigh in as someone who's a veteran journalist. How has the conversation even in the media, and how is media now reporting climate change? Is there a change that has happened over the past few years or after the flood? Or, I mean, if you could also tell us some of those trends on narrative and conversation.
Sure. Would you like me to address the common question first and then come to this, or should I just speak about this?
Oh, I thought we could do the common question after later, because if you could.
Sure, no issues. Yeah. So the thing is, you see, as a journalist, like you said, veteran, I don't think my hair color hides that fact. The thing is that it hasn't really been about climate change. Unfortunately, it's more been about the disaster and the coverage of the disaster and its aftermath. So climate change has come into the conversation by the same people who have been talking about this for pre-disaster days. Those who focus on climate change journalism, those who've been writing on the environment. But on the broader media level, this thing has been highlighted because of the scale of the disaster, the intensity of the disaster. And I would actually be very interested, and actually I would be hopeful to see the conversation of climate change go beyond the coverage of the disaster when we've sort of pulled ourselves out of it, to keep on talking about climate change, the measures that need to be taken, the adaptive measures that need to be taken, and very rightly said by Rizwana that the negotiating skills also need to come to at par. We do have a narrow nationalist interest, but if you look at it, the way in the COP, she also acknowledged that all three countries, they came together on this single point agenda that we have to get the perpetrators to agree that they are responsible and also bear the cost of that responsibility. Because the countries who are bearing the brunt of the emissions, which is actually the main trigger of climate change, are not the ones who are causing it. They are bearing the brunt and they can't cope with it on their own. So that one point, if these three countries could have come together, we will have our differences. We do have separate issues to talk about as well. But there are many commonalities, and I think, it's important, like Mr. Upreti has said, that we need to have a broader South Asian climate dialogue, or maybe a document. It doesn't have to go into the nitty-gritty, but at least, that can be a roadmap document, and focus on the commonalities, because the borders are drawn by us, not by nature. And people must remember that it's not just the politics of it, it's the natural ecological systems which by these divisions are getting harmed. There's a lot of biodiversity habitat loss because we have these fences on the border. Now, I'm not saying, and nobody's going to agree to that idea, it's a bit too utopian maybe, that there shouldn't be fences on the border. But there are animals which have not been able to access their actual habitat because now it's all fenced. This was documented for Kashmir, this was documented for other areas, just as it is documented within our own country, where we put up infrastructure, which also leads to an unbalancing of the habitat and the ecosystem. So there are issues. The good thing is, where I think the hope is vested, maybe I will not see that coming to fruition in my lifetime, and maybe our children will benefit from that, is that a common conversation is happening at the civil society and organizations level. I'm also a part of another forum, which is a civil society. It is right now an online forum because it started during COVID. And it is South Asian Peace Action Network, which focused very deeply on climate change, its impacts, and people from all these countries got together. They highlighted the common issues and they highlighted the common, solutions that we could work at. The political will is a different thing. We do not have a say in that. Now, as for the in the current disaster, I'm just hoping that one thing which has happened is that there is a sense of urgency at the governance level and at the civil society level that something has to be done right now. If we do not have an adaptation policy, we need to get to that adaptation policy, put our resources behind it, because we cannot do mitigation other than what we have all, or your country, my country, Bangladesh and Nepal, have committed through the NDCs. And yes, people think, that we have all said that we will peak, but ultimately we have said that we will, go towards net zero. So I think that's something positive for a country which in any case is not an emitter at the scale where the world is in jeopardy. So I think it goes to the credit of all our countries who are still committing to mitigate. But our focus needs to be on adaptation, because that is what our people need. So that realization is now really, above the radar, and I hope it stays that way. That's
yeah, thank you so much. I think so. Taking on from that, I have a question for both of you. So, first of all, so now that we are seeing the impact of climate change in a big way, how do you see the relations between the South Asian nations changing? And what do you think? What do you kind of see that might happen and in impacting the relations? And also, how do you see the relationship of the rest of the world with South Asia changing or being impacted? And with that, I think the second part would be that, or the third part rather, that do you at all see that we can build South Asian solidarity? Though you've kind of answered some of it, but if you could just specifically focus on that. But yeah, so relations between the nations of South Asia, relations of South Asia with the rest of the world, and possibility of a solidarity. So Dr. Preti, we can start with you.
Thank you very much. It is really a very, very tough question. All of us know There are differences. There are serious differences in some political issue, but it's a reality. And the problem now is that often we are directly relating with the political issue and subsiding all other pertinent issues like climate insecurity, climate injustice, and many other livelihood-related issue of the South Asian people. This is the 1/3 of the humanity existed in this area, and there is an excellent exchange between the citizens of different countries. There are common concerns. There are quite a common type of the collaboration for the decades, and this common concern are collectively known. The problem remains with the political level, particularly because of the historical thing between these two bigger countries in South Asia, India and Pakistan. But still, sooner or later, the political decision maker must realize, and I am sure they will realize, that political issue is not only the issue which will be pressing to the region, and therefore they have to come. There was a little bit of cynical view expressed from our colleague from Bangladesh. Of course, if we will see at present, yes, there may be a different capacity, different issues. For example, if this glacier melt in the Himalayas is finished, where India will drink the water, the whole system will be affected. So in that sense, it becomes the common security concern, even bigger than what India and Pakistan are feeling. There are many other differences as well. Still, there are a very positive thing about the citizens to citizens engagement, common and collective understanding, and therefore either the political leadership, they will realize themselves, or from exerting the pressure from civil society, media, academics and researcher and globe as a whole will exert the pressure, and therefore there is a possibility to collaborate, and this climate insecurity, climate injustice and climate risk will be the common point for them to work together. That is my belief. I hope I am 60 and within my lifetime I will be able to see that first. The second, relation between the South Asia and the world only looks from two angles. India is their stakeholders and others are marginalized, one bigger dimension. The second dimension is that the insecurity in Pakistan may create a global insecurity, and therefore we have to do something like that. Even the feeling of this Islamic ideology and not favoring other points, etc., will also be coming. So what I see, honestly, the world is not treating South Asia the way they have to treat us, because we are such a big region with such a large number of the people residing here, with such a big poverty, inequality, injustice, and all that, which the common responsibility of the West also to address that, because particularly when we talk about the climate injustice, who is responsible for producing the gas emission? We are not the South Asian, no, maybe a little bit of India, but still there are others who are producing the emission gas, and their consequences we are bearing, and therefore it is not our demand to them, it is their responsibility to cooperate and collaborate and to support. So there, even if the enough attention is not given to the region, they also have to do that, because it will also affect them. For example, the migration related issue, for example, many other issues which will directly relate. Therefore, I see the climate insecurity, climate injustice and climate threat is the common meeting point for the South Asian member countries, as well as South Asia and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. Ms. Salam, moving on to you.
So thank you. It means I'm older than Mr. Preeti. That's why I said maybe my children will see that. But I think he's absolutely right. It is at the civil society level, you know, when we meet at forums, whether they are online or physical, the Bangladeshis, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Nepalese, they're all sitting together, they're all pouring out the same problems. They're trying to seek solutions. There is a whole pool of knowledge which is shared very freely amongst each other. Whether it is about the air quality and the pollution aspects, whether it is how we treat our rivers and what we are trying to do to, undo the harm that we have done to it. There are many things that Indian, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Nepalese, we sit together on that. But yes, as Mr. Opriti said, the glass ceiling right now has been the political strata. So, we shouldn't give up. We should keep on doing what we are doing. We should keep on sharing knowledge of climate change and environmental developments and solutions and problems. And ultimately, it'll have to be either, God forbid, something so bad happens that all of them, they realize that we have to sit together on the same table, the political leadership. Or it is the people whose voices will be so resonant that they will not be able to be ignored. I know EU was mentioned as a model over here, but EU also did not have every country at the same level for the longest of time, and it is already broken. So, we've had the Brexit as well within, the same generation which created it. And within EU, there are countries which have fought wars for hundreds of years. They've killed millions of each other's thing, and yet they are together for a common goal. So I don't know whether I should even call it utopian, because within our lifetime, we have seen, fierce adversaries sit together and come together for solution and something to do for the betterment of the people. When that realization comes, maybe, yes, it is a pity that SAARC as a forum is not being utilized. It was an excellent forum for all of South Asia. But even if SAARC is not being utilized, we must use whatever collaborative work can be done, whether it is through the academia, whether it is through environmental organizations, whether it is within our countries or at international or even regional forums. That does deliver results. And if you will permit me, I'll give you a quick example. Ahmedabad was hit with a heat wave. I quote this example many places. It was hit by a very severe heat wave before the 2015 heat wave that killed many people in Karachi within 3 days. But Ahmedabad's heat wave management plan was drawn by researchers and environmental consultants who were working in a transboundary organization. They were Pakistanis and they were sitting with their Indian colleagues, and they drew out that management plan. And it was implemented. Nobody said that, oh, there were Pakistanis part of this solution, so we will not. And then when the Karachi was hit, the similar Ahmedabad adaptation plan was tailored to fit to Karachi's problem. So we have so many examples, and there's a lot of camaraderie and there's a lot of cordiality between these people from different countries who do sit together and come up. So, that is a point of hope. Now, when that push will come to shove, I can't say. I can't predict that. But I think that just because we are being frustrated because of the top leadership, their inaction or whatever you want to call it, they're so set in stone. I don't think we need to give up. We need to keep at it. That's the only thing that I can think of. We can't let go of the opportunity that this collaboration offers to us to move to the next level.
Thank you so much again. Very, very useful and pertinent points there. So I'm going to so I had some of the questions that I did also want to ask, also merge or align with the questions that have been posted from the audience. I think I have one question that is specifically for you, Ms. Salam, which is, what steps have been taken to prevent or mitigate disasters like floods in Pakistan in the future? What was the plan that was then implemented? So that very specifically to Pakistan, because even I'm very curious to understand what steps were taken post the floods.
Well, actually, we are still not in the post-flood era. If we have several districts where there's still stagnant water, and that's also because of the geography, and of course the inefficiencies or the gaps in the quality of the construction or infrastructure have been exposed because of these floods. So the measures right now that are being taken, because there are so many people who are impacted, it's difficult to say what needs to be done first. They need, obviously, the people, we've lost our two crops, food crop as well as cash crops. So we need rehabilitation on that score. We need to rebuild people's houses because a lot of people have lost their homes. There's a livestock, gap as well. So that means the prices of milks and food and meat have skyrocketed. So it's a double jeopardy because people who already had very little to go on have lost everything. And Pakistan is not a very rich country. All of whatever money was allocated for different, long-term and planned projects were repurposed to provide immediate relief. But what has happened is that the realization that we cannot not do anything about it. So there are plans to have the better infrastructure. There are plans to map out the vulnerability. There are plans to have these early warning systems. We do have in some areas, like I mentioned, in the glacial north, we do have the early warning systems in 2-3 specific areas which are more vulnerable to glacial lake outburst floods. But that now we do know that Pakistan is a hazard prone, especially flood hazards prone country. So we need to have that, capacity and the capacity of the people to be able to install and use, and training of the communities in disaster management, in disaster risk reduction, by moving them away from the path of the water. Because many people, most of the damage has actually occurred because the rain fell in areas which were the non-monsoon areas, as I mentioned. So they didn't really know, because for many, many years so much water hadn't come from that area. So they were there, they were living there, there were settlements there, there were villages there, and they were just washed away. So we need to have this kind of a vulnerability mapping, which is being worked on. So people are away from such hazardous areas. And, it's very easy for me to just utter this sentence, but you can't just move people away. Those are their ancestral lands. Any other place to go, will they have the same kind of same level of livelihood? The dignity needs to be kept in mind. The legal aspects, the title of land, where are you moving them, what will be given in compensation. So it's a very, very big and complex task, which our words are very, very inadequate to reflect. But the realization has come and work is being done. And I don't know if it is going to be done as fast as anybody would wish, because as I said, it's complex and it needs a lot of resources. And right now we have had pledges, but we need to see those pledges being translated into the resources which have to be put into these meteorological systems and infrastructure, the rebuild and the housing rebuild. So it's not going to happen very fast, but I'm just hoping that this realization doesn't sort of dilute, because it's already been about 8 months. That means the next monsoon cycle is just a few months away, and we are all wary of it. That where will it strike this time? If the climate change angle is, we don't know which other area is going to be impacted. So these are going to be systemic approaches, systemic overhauls that are needed.
Thank you so much. I mean, that answers so many questions that I also had personally. But so I will end with a question for both of you, which is kind of taken from a question that someone's actually asking. I mean, there are a lot of questions that I see around, like the international role and the role of international treaties itself. So but we discussed that, so I'm not going to go there. But I want to move on to talking about solutions. So someone asked that, what can individuals do to reduce their carbon footprint and contribute to addressing climate crisis in South Asia? So my question also kind of derives from there. I want to move on to solutions and know from you, what are, say, solutions at 3 levels? What are the top 3 things that the government needs to do immediately? What does the civil society need to do immediately? And what can individuals do to kind of reduce their own carbon footprint and contribute to the climate crisis? I mean, contribute to reducing the climate crisis, not to the climate crisis. But yes. So, Dr. Patel, we can start with you. Government, civil society, individuals. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The three level, the hierarchically first, the individual, you see, one of the problem we realize here also, we are not yet sensitive enough. There is a lack of awareness, and our behavioral pattern is also, for example, the consumeristic way we are using the insensitive emission, the transportation, agricultural practices also. First and foremost, what it is important to do as an individual to change our behavior, which is not that easy, and it is directly related with the civil society. Now, the role of the civil society is to raise the awareness because of the risk, the threat. So far, in many of the countries, the climate-related risk is not realized the way it has to realize. The degree and intensity of the problem in the future climate insecurity is causing is not internalized. So first and foremost is to make aware by the civil society to the citizens, to the individual people to change their behavior pattern, particularly in terms of consumeristic behavior pattern, in terms of using the alternative energy sources, the renewable energy sources. Also, the role of civil society, the second important role of the civil society is to work concertedly among the different actors and exert the consistent positive pressure to the government. What I realized working in my 45 years in different institutions and the layers, what I realized, government are not that responsive at the beginning, and they need some sort of pressure, but the constructive pressure, giving alternatives, giving solutions, and engaging them, so making them also aware. That is the second part of the civil society has to do, and doing that, it will help the individual to understand and as well as help to the government to understand and also exert the positive pressure, also exert positive pressure to the broader global. So to do that, civil society of these individual country is not enough. So we have to develop the consortium, we have to develop the collaboration, we have to have the common mechanism where we can bring this issue, talk that issues and bring the findings of the scientists about the risk, future risk, to make them aware. So basically in South Asia, we need to develop a bigger collaboration between the civil society as well. Regarding the government, as I also earlier said, the government is the key driver here, and government has to listen to the people, government has to realize, and for that there are already some initiatives, regional, sub-regional and national initiatives which we have to do. And first and foremost again is to move to the alternative energy or the renewable energy source. This cutting fossil fuel is the important first step, and for that the South Asian government, my government in my country, as well as the South Asian government, has to focus more onto the alternative energy and bring the policy, law, institutional arrangement suitable and responsive to that. The second part, the developing the negotiation capacity of the state to negotiate with the international community, because largely so far the negotiation is also dominated by the West. Our political leaders raise the concern, but that continuously translating into the action needs someone to take that further and engage with them, which is largely lacking or inadequate, insufficient, and there we have to do that. So South Asia as a single region has to stand and exert the positive pressure to the West and to hear them and to support them and to make them realize that it is not only the concern of South Asian countries, but also them. Of course, it is first and foremost the responsibility of South Asian government and countries, but it is not sufficient, and the West has to do. Because when we see the negotiation in Egypt, negotiation in UK, Glasgow, and others, always there is a resistance and this and that argument. And doing that we will not be able to reduce the global temperature. And if we are not able to reduce that, it will not only affect us, it will also affect them. So we have to work together. That is how I see. But it is easier said than done. We have to start somewhere, someone, and right now. And this is one of the very good initiative this organization took. So it requires the series of such type of the event, meeting, organization, debate and discussion, and that will certainly exert the pressure. And next time I hope the organizer will also bring the government officials, environmental ministers and others in such a forum, and then we'll be able to raise the concern and listen them how they want to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments. Ms. Salam, concluding remarks to this question.
So my concluding remark would actually echo what Dr. Preeti has said, because the role of governments and civil societies are two different things. And the government, as far as reducing your question about reducing a common person, the carbon emissions, our collective carbon emissions are insignificant when you look at the bigger emitters. So, the people of all our the countries, all 4 countries right now, 5 countries who are participating in this, are minuscule as compared to the bigger emitters. Despite that, they have committed that they will reduce, and they've given a pathway. Now, what is the role of the civil society in that is that, yes, it needs to make the other common people aware, and then reach that critical mass to be able to bear pressure on their collective governments or individual countries' governments to make sure that the commitments they have made with the international community are kept. That pathway is not, going anywhere, so you're going into a nebulous kind of a future. Because it's not something that we have committed to any other countries or any other global group. It's for our own benefit that we have, made those emissions targets or emission reduction targets rather. It's in our benefit to go transition from fossil fuel into, clean energy and everything else that has been promised. But as far as the civil society is concerned, the other thing is, I think now the role of it being a doer needs to take a secondary place to being a watchdog of the commitments made by the government, by their own governments, by their own regional, organizations, associations, SAC, and any other official forums, and call out the people or the governments or the group which is not actually fulfilling the commitments. So while we must celebrate the solidarity and the coming together of the South Asian countries which made finally the loss and damage agreement, because that was being discussed from pre-COP times. I think it's a 30-year-old conversation and COPs are just 27 years old. But we must also actually call out that there was no adhering to emissions control by the bigger emitters. So somehow in this celebration, not enough criticism was made of that. And I think we need to also focus on what countries are not doing, not just on what they are doing, because what the countries which are not doing what they are supposed to do is leading to the other countries not being able to meet the targets because they keep getting hit by the consequences of those rising emissions. So the rat has to get off that.
I think Ms. Salam, we may have lost you. Okay, it might be a glitch or an internet glitch. Ms. Salam, can you hear us? Okay, so in that case, maybe we can move on to the concluding remarks. Yeah, we can conclude the discussion in that case. And so with this, we have come to the end of our panel discussion. And I would like to thank the speakers for very, very insightful and thought-provoking comments, and something that we should definitely act upon. And as we conclude the event, I would like to invite Dr. Carsten Klein, the head of Friedrich Naumann Foundation South Asia, for his remarks. Dr. Carsten Klein started working with the German Armed Forces, joining the Foreign and Security Policy section of the parliamentary group of the Free Democratic Party in Bundestag, the German parliament in Berlin, followed by him managing the FDP parliamentary groups in 2 state assemblies. He was also managing the department responsible for the international business of the Federal Employment Agency, the Central Placement Office for Foreigners and Specialists. So welcome, Dr. Klein, and the floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you very, very much to all of you for this very insightful, very good, and also very complex discussion. Undoubtedly, climate change has an enormous impact on the well-being of people all around the world. And UNHCR has estimated, for example, that annually an average of more than 21 million people are forcibly displaced by weather and climate related phenomena. That is undoubtedly an enormous number which affects us around the world, here in South Asia, but also in Europe. In Europe, as we see now, for example, for various reasons, again, a certain development of migration coming into countries in Central and into Europe, in America, and so on and so on. And a part of this migration, of course, is also affected by climate change related issues. Anyway, we, Friedrich Naumann Foundation here in South Asia, thought that it would be high time to create a platform with esteemed panelists, with esteemed experts from many of the South Asian countries. So I think we really need to establish more of these platforms. Let me please emphasize that, for example, the meetings, the platforms amongst people, amongst organizations, also amongst schools, amongst students, is extremely needed in order to help, as you rightly said, to formulate a common South Asian climate policy with the governments. I mean, you need necessarily the political will of different governments, but you also need the actors from the schools, from the universities, from civil society, and of course also from the private sector. So we are very happy as Friedrich Naumann Foundation to just take a very small little piece and try to help to foster this intersectoral pan-South Asian dialogue. Let us really hope and let us do our bit to enhance especially the pan-South Asian and also international exchange. Unfortunately, as mentioned, SAARC is not really in the possibility to do so, but then perhaps the focus might shift to other international organizations like BIMSTEC, which are operating in the area. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. Friedrich Naumann Foundation has a motto, which is Naumann goes eco, and therefore please allow us to have these forms of seminars, not necessarily as in-person forms and platforms, but also as webinars, because we think that that is our humble contribution to reduce the ecological footprint. Thanks again to all of our panelists, Mrs. Razan from Bangladesh, Mrs. Salam from Pakistan, Dr. Raj Upreti from Nepal. Thank you very much to our moderator, Mrs. Zina from India, and of course to our keynote speaker, Mr. Om Katel from Bhutan. Thank you very much to you, the audience, and please allow me to thank you, or to thank also my team here in South Asia, especially the motivator of this interaction today, Mr. Bipin Gimre. Mr. Gimre is working for our foundation, but he is also a postdoc student at the South Asian University, a SAC appendix organization. We are very, very happy to have such very important organizations in South Asia. Thanks to Tenzin Paljo, Mrs. Mishra and Mrs. Saxena for all your efforts organizing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, please to follow us on our social media channels. For example, in Kathmandu on 15th and 16th of March, we will have a river conference also covering ecological effects. So we would be very, very happy to welcome some of you in Nepal. Thank you very much. We will definitely continue this conversation and our efforts. On behalf of Friedrich Naumann Foundation South Asia, I wish you a very good evening. Thank you again and best wishes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Bye.